So, to follow along with that, there is a part of us, there's a part of human beings that will devour the whole fucking earth. That is totally insatiable. Culturally, there are cultures that deal with that part of human beings in a better way than other cultures. Western culture is very poor at dealing with that insatiable part. And in Western culture, in Western myth, the part of us that is known as the Titans, the Titanic. Last night, as I was telling the story, and sometimes, an image strikes you as you're telling the story rather than when you're preparing the story. But it wasn't until last night when the image of the prince under the bed with the Titan on top of him made me realize that this is a story about how to unpeel the Titanic layer in our own psyches. The heartless, all-devouring Titanic layer. I've been reading a couple of writers on this. One is a man named Rafael Lopez Pedraza. He wrote a book called Cultural Anxiety. Lopez was a close associate of James Hillman and really one of the founders of archetypal psychology. And we haven't heard a lot about him, but I encourage you to look into his work. He, in Cultural Anxiety, he has a lot of information about Titanism and the concept of it. James Hillman as well gave a lecture years ago. He actually shared it at this conference. But it was a lecture he gave to the Schumacher Institute. Schumacher was the guy who came up with the idea that small is beautiful. You've heard that idea? So Hillman added to that, giving a lecture called ... and huge is ugly. And it is a lecture that touches on and deals with the Titanic layer in the human psyche. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Titanism is, the energy of Titanism, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the myth of the Titans as it comes to us from the Greeks and the classical world in Europe. Titanism is all about breaking limits. So we use the word Titanic, Titan, as synonymous with giantism, so big, out of control. But it's also about outliving, outthinking, outknowing, unlimited power. It is power without limits. When you look at our society, there's a lot of that going on. In June of this year, there was a miniature submarine named Titan that went down to explore the wreck of a ship that sank in 1912 called Titanic. Now, Titanic, as we all know, was a ship that was thought to be unsinkable. It was going to break the speed record. All limits were going to be broken by this ship. It, of course, struck an iceberg and went down into the very real depths of the ocean. The mini sub was made by a wealthy guy who didn't listen to submarine designers. Was going to not allow the limits of what the egghead material scientists told him, and he built a deep sea submersible out of carbon fiber, which, as it turns out, doesn't work. But he wouldn't be persuaded, and of course that was the situation. Interestingly, they both have Titan in the name, the Titanic had a sister ship, the Olympic, named for the Olympian gods. It had a long and never had a problem, was a very good handling ship, went through 2 world wars. And
my grandmother came over on that ship.
there you go.
Oh,
Yeah.
age 12.
Yeah.
Gave us Steve.
Yeah, there we go. There was a Titan missile program. It was the main intercontinental ballistic missile for the United States. It was going to unleash power and energy that could wipe out life on the planet. The missiles, especially one iteration of those missiles, had notoriously unstable fuel and highly corrosive fuel that could not be contained in their silos. And as far as I know, the only people a Titan missile ever killed were the men that worked on it. Silicon Valley is kind of the capital of Titanism right now. We call them tech titans, right? The whole idea of Silicon Valley, they have disruptor conferences. The whole idea is to break all the rules, right? And in many cases, those companies, those organizations openly flaunt laws and regulations and simply allow governments to try to stop them. They are titanic in nature. So that's some of the energy of Titanism. I was mentioning to Scott, like, the energy of Titanism could be a Nike ad. You know, no limits. Just do it.
Yeah.
That's Titanism. And in America and the West, you know, in the West in particular, and in America, it's Titanism is deep, deep in this culture. It's about being bigger, faster, and more invulnerable. And that's that giant in the story, right? His heart is not in his body. He cannot be killed. He's bigger, he's more invulnerable. And it's also, Hillman talks about omnipresent, everywhere, big. The human footprint is now omnipresent. There are microplastics in the deepest and most remote part of the oceans. Omniscient, all-knowing. I can pull out my phone and I can look up any fact. And now we're creating an intelligence that is, you know, possibly beyond human in a different way. Faster, smarter. And it basically invulnerable. So that is a layer of the human psyche. And like I said, other cultures have technologies, have stories to kind of keep that in line. There's a lot of Native American stories where they're just devouring cannibals and things like that, and giants. Those exist. It's not that it's not in the human psyche, but there are technologies in those cultures to keep that thing controlled. And in the West, we glorify. The concept of Titans comes from Greek myth. They're considered kind of a primordial version of the gods. So they're the gods before the gods. There are versions of them. So Selene, someone mentioned Endymion and Selene. Selene was the moon goddess, the moon titaness. She kind of gets replaced by Artemis, one of the Olympian gods, and things like that. Helios was a titan of the sun, kind of replaced by Apollo. The idea was that these were old gods. It's kind of a false notion. There's no real evidence that there were ever cults of these gods, that they really were old gods. They're kind of a projection of a proto-god, a god without restraint, a god without control. In the myth, probably one of the most famous titans is named Kronos. And many of you have probably seen the fabulous Goya painting of Saturn, is the Roman name of Kronos, devouring a child. So Kronos what the story of Kronos is that there was basically Mother Earth, Gaia, and Father Sky, Uranus. And they were fucking constantly and generating all kinds of early creative soup of stuff. And some of their children were the Titans. One of their children was Kronos. And he decided he was going to supplant his father. He cut his father's dick off with a sickle. The dick landed in the sea, and the foam spewed out, and it became the goddess of love. But Kronos supplanted his father, Uranus. He became now king of creation. He became the potent one. Kronos, of course, is associated with our concept of time. We talk about chronometers, chronology. That comes from the name Kronos. Kronos married Rhea, who's associated with flowing things. So a dimmer is a rheostat. It controls the flow of electricity. That comes from her name. So we had time entering a flow. And so that era of primordial creation ended, and we entered an area of flowing time. We start to put things on a timeline. Things are starting to become linear now. Kronos had a notion that one of his children might do to him what he did to his father.
How'd you get that idea?
Yeah, exactly. Where would that idea come from? And so, to prevent this, whenever Rhea gave birth, he would take the child and swallow it. And their children were the children that became the initial Olympian gods. Hera, Poseidon, Hades, Hestia, some others. The last one that she gave birth to was Zeus, the shining one. Rhea had become a little tired of this process of giving birth and having the children swallowed. So she conspired with Gaia to hide Zeus, and they substituted a stone that they gave to Kronos. He swallowed the stone, and they hid Zeus away in a cave in Crete. So Zeus grew up. He eventually married a being called Metis, who is cunning intelligence. So the Zeus, the thunderbolt of inspiration, married cunning intelligence. And she came up with a plan to slip an emetic, something that makes you vomit, to Kronos. He vomited up the stone, and then he vomited up, undigested, all the Olympian gods. And then together, Zeus with the Olympian gods and some other allies fought a war with the Titans. It was called the Titanomachy. And the Olympian gods won. And they consigned the Titans, the rebellious Titans, not all the Titans rebelled. They consigned the rebellious Titans to Tartarus. Tartarus is an area as far below Hades, as far below the underworld as the earth is below the celestial world. And so that's where the Titans were to remain. So the idea was to contain that energy, and now we have a new creation, a new set of rules, but the Titanic energy, it is contained. Well, as I said, not all the Titans were consigned to Tartarus, just some of them. There's another very famous Titan, Prometheus. So Prometheus' name means forward thinking. Forward, mythos is where we get our word for mentality, things like that. Look forward thinking forward into the future. Prometheus is the most famous for bringing fire to human beings. And that's how we know him, and he was then punished by Zeus and chained to a rock. But that's not quite the whole story. in the actual story, Prometheus has a number of brothers, including one identical twin brother, Epimetheus. Looking back, Epimetheus we hear almost nothing about. And we hear about him through Plato, through Plato's dialogues. And in it, Epimetheus is basically slandered as being stupid and backward looking, right? He doesn't think ahead. He doesn't think in terms of progress. I think there's a huge cultural misunderstanding in the West of what Epimetheus really is. Epimetheus in the stories was given the task, along with Prometheus, of assigning the Creator's original instructions to all the beings in the world. And Epimetheus volunteered to actually do the actual assigning, to pick what happens. So lions will have claws and teeth, and giraffes will eat high leaves, and rabbits will dig holes, and all of that. Oak trees will do what they do. He assigned all the gifts of creation to the various beings. And Prometheus acted simply as kind of quality control. He would kind of check it out. So there came a time when they had assigned everything to all the beings except one, but they had run out of things to assign. And the creature that was left over that didn't have a way of being, a creator's original instruction, was Ben Dennis. And Walton Stanley, and all the rest of us here. It was the human beings. And so, trying to think of how they would keep this fragile thing alive without Creator's instructions, without the abilities of the jackal or the weasel or the sparrow or any of those things to make a living. Prometheus and Epimetheus broke into the workshop of Hephaestus. Epimetheus stole fire from Hephaestus' forge and also the ability to craft things, and also stole some of that knowledge of technology, of making things, of manipulating things from Athena, the goddess of wisdom.
Epimetheus?
Epimetheus. Backward thinking backward. And they brought that to humankind, and some other gifts were brought, and we survived. Now, according to Plato, Epimetheus is a complete idiot because he didn't count ahead. He didn't plan ahead. He didn't dole out the gifts properly. My question to Plato is, would he really want to have the Creator's way of being of a dung beetle for us instead of what we have? No. But the thing I really want to say about it is that is a slander that has been carried by the West, by the culture that Plato came out of and that Plato influenced. That slander has been put on indigenous people wherever the West has encountered them. That they look backwards. They are paying attention to ancestral knowledge, right? They're not looking ahead. They're not planning anything. They have no sense of progress. They're not putting the land to use. Right? So we're caught in that Promethean idea and system of looking ahead. One little story, John Stokes, who was a trapper and thinker and author, told at this conference. He had John spent time in Australia, and he was mentored by an indigenous Australian man who was a master tracker. And master tracker was an old guy by the time John knew him, and but he said the police sometimes would come if a child was lost or there was a fugitive on the run. They would ask for a tracker to track the person down. And the old guy liked to drive fast, so he would get in the police car, and he would make the police drive at about 90 miles an hour, and he would track at 90 miles an hour. Now, he's not reading little signs in the dust at that speed. He's tracking on a whole other level. And the thing I want to say is that in order for him to be able to look ahead that way, to track at 90 miles an hour, he has to be looking back to about 500 generations of trackers before him. He has to have incredible epimethean sight in order to have promethean sight at that level. There's a reason that those two are twins in the story. They may be, in fact, identical twins. We have ignored one of the twins in this society, and we have foisted the slander of Epimetheus onto other peoples who do have epimethean sight. The last thing I want to say is that a lot of those cultures are oral cultures. They come from oral traditions. And so looking back is the way, looking back and using mnemonics, using story, using a kind of memory theater that is ritual and rite, is the way that wisdom and knowledge, and even technical knowledge, is transmitted in those cultures. We are a mediated culture since the advent of writing some 6,000 years ago. And so we get farther and farther and farther away from the epimethean because of the mediation of consciousness. Writing was a big step in that, but now we have hyper-mediated our consciousness in the last few generations. And that takes us further and further away from that kind of connected consciousness, from a kind of humility, right? Being connected with the earth. The word human is earth being. We're part of the earth. But when we lose that connection, when we lose that humility, what comes up is the Titanic in us. And I think I'll just leave it there.
I wanna share a poem that I think will help address this. You've heard me quote Umberto Accavallo ad nauseum, but his poetry has a way of linking to me in particular, especially because I'm from different. I have three major ethnicities running in me, fighting with each other. Rah, you're my people. You're my being. No, you're my being. But when after being invited to participate in ceremonies, I went out and started looking at my own roots. My great-grandfather was Maya Kichek. So one of the things that drives me is, where is that seed buried in me? And after I met Umberto, I realized is that we are claimed by the lands that we live in. We eat all the minerals, right? They are now, what used to be stones are now our bones. So in some form we resonate, whether we want to accept it or not. We're being indigenized, the way the original immigrants came to this place. There's all kinds of stories of how people arrived at this continent, right? 25,000, 30,000 years ago, my belief is that humans emerged in different parts of the earth at simultaneous times, but that's just my belief. You don't have to, this is just how I look at it. But in one of the poems that Umberto shared with me, he said this: roots tell us through the flowers what the earth is like on the inside. Roots tell us through the flowers what the earth is like on the inside. Now you can take that, just that phrase alone, you can claim your own relationship to source directly. Nothing in between, nothing. And you go directly to source, and that will allow you to feel that you are connected to the original creative force of the universe. And each one of us, each ethnic group, each human being has a direct connection with no intermediary. And the poem says this, and the flowers, they wither and they die because life out here is shit. Roots tell us through the flowers what the earth is like on the inside. And the flowers, they wither and they die because life out here is shit. Now the counter to that, he says, for a long time I have loved you, like the roots that with all of the power of the earth love until they burst into flower. Like the roots that with all of the power of the earth love until they burst into flower. So our job, however our roots are made now, however they are configured through the ethnic background, no matter where you come from, our job is to learn how to love like the roots do until we burst into flower. This is how we have to think about that. Love. In a much, much different way. Love has brought us together here in some form. I have a lot of stories about why love is so significant, and I don't want to bore you to death. So find me lunch and I'll tell you some stories, but all based on love and understanding how the races are going to learn how to be with each other in a non-compromised way. But this is important, so thank you, Walton, because it shows you how we are all gifted in a unique form as human beings, and we forget that we are gifted. We have gifts to contribute to the remaking of the wheel that has been broken for a long time. So, I think we're ready to move on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Walton.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.